So next, let's go ahead and implement a registration page. So go into public, and as we recall, this is the front end side of things. Go into apps, inside of views, and then inside of pages, create another folder called users. And this is where we're going to save all the pages that have to do with the user, such as login, register, profile, etc. So inside of users, create a new page called register. .html. Okay, and so just type in anything just for test purposes. So we'll just say hello from register page, or we'll say route. Save that. So go into your routes file and create a new one that says when register brackets template URL app views pages users register. And just as a refresher, what this means is when users type in /register, we'll feed them this view or this template into the view. Okay. Now let's go ahead and test this out. One other thing, actually, go back into index and let's create a new navigation. So where it says contact, just put in register. Okay. Now go ahead and hit refresh on your page, and you'll see the new link up here. So just hit register, and there we go. We know the route is working. So let's go back into it, and we can start building our form, right? So go ahead and create a div class page header, and we'll call it user registration. Below that, let's start building our form, and we're gonna have 3 fields: email, username, password. So go ahead and provide a label, input, text, name it email, and then insert a break. And then we'll just do the same thing with the other fields. And then afterwards we'll insert a button here. Put register. Okay. And type, it'll be submit. Alright, so let's hit refresh and see what this looks like. Alright, so it doesn't look too good, right? So let's implement some Bootstrap into this, okay? So for this page header, let's go ahead and do this. Cut this out. We'll just put it in a heading like that. And then let's add placeholders to all of these. So we'll say email, or please enter email. Another one here says please enter user password. Enter password. Okay, and so let's add a class to each one of these that says form control. Okay. Okay, and then for the register button, we'll create a different class, and it will be btn dash primary. Okay, and let's see what this looks like. Okay, that looks a lot better. So now what we want to do is we want to add some functionality to this register button. So the way we do that is we add our first controller. Okay, so back in the original folder we created controllers. Go ahead and create a new one and name it user control. User uppercase ctrl.js. and we'll just type in console.log testing user CTRL. Okay, and if you'll recall, here in the console is where we'll get the message if we wire this up correctly. So go back to your index page, and underneath your other JavaScript Angular, go ahead and link that. So we'll go src app controllers ctrl.js. Okay, and then if you hit refresh on your page, you'll see if that worked or not. Okay, so we know we're mapped up because it loaded correctly. So back in the controller, you can go ahead and delete that and create a module. We'll name it user controllers. With no dependencies at the moment. Then we'll say .config. And inside that configuration, we'll just pass a function to test this out, and we'll just say testing new module. Okay. So before this will work, right, you have to go ahead and copy the name of the module and go into your app configuration file. That's your app.js inside of public app, and then add it as a dependency. So you go ahead and type in comma, just like that. Okay. So back at your page, go ahead and hit refresh. And there you go, testing new module. So we know we have our module wired up correctly. So we can go ahead and delete all this configuration. Instead, what we'll do is we'll create a controller, and we'll name this controller, let's say regctrl, right? We'll pass a function, and again, we'll just test this out, right? So we'll say testing registration controller. Okay. And so in order to pass this controller into the application, what we want to do is copy this, the name of the controller, and go into our routes. And underneath the route, which is right here, underneath the template, you type in comma controller, and then you provide the controller, right? And then one last thing that I like to do is comma again, and then controller as. And then we'll just name it. So controller as is basically a nickname for the controller that you want to use in your application, and we'll just call it register. Alright, so let's go ahead and hit refresh and see if that worked. And there you go, testing registration controller. So going back to the controller, we can go ahead and delete this. And let's go ahead and create a function for that button so that it does something. So we'll just say, let's say reg user, right? Because that's what we're doing. We'll just do a console log to test it. Testing new button. Okay. And then in our registration, we'll go ahead and say in the form, we'll type in ng submit, and we'll say reg user, right? So basically what that's saying is when this form is submitted, activate this function. And that's this function right here. So one thing to note, right, this isn't going to work like this because we have to add this .reg user, right? That's the only way it's going to work inside of our application. And then one final thing, if you go back to our routes, we nicknamed it controller as register, right? So we have to take this and implement it in before any stuff that we use from the controller. So it's going to look like this, register.regUser. Okay, so let's go ahead and test this out and see what we get. So go ahead and hit refresh on your page, and then just hit the register button, and you'll see testing new button comes up, and you can press it multiple times and it'll keep going, right? So we have a functioning button. So what we want to do now is take the data that's typed into the form and pass it to our controller, right? So how do we do that? Well, we do that by using something called ngModel. So we just type in ngModel, and then you can name your model anything you want to, right? We'll just call it regData, okay? And remember, like before, you have to type in register dot and everything. So we'll just go ahead and do that, register dot, and then we'll copy this and paste it on all the other ones. Okay, so right now these are going to conflict because they all have the same name. So what we can do is just type in .username, I mean email, and then .username, and .password, right? And so what we do inside of the function here, we pass in reg data, right? And what that does is it takes all three of these and it submits it as one data, one object right here. But we have to go back to the controller and pass that in there, right? So we'll say reg data. So let's go ahead and test this out, right? So we'll just change this to form submitted, so we know when it's submitted, and then we'll log this data to see if we're passing it to the controller successfully, right? So we'll say reg data. Now, just like before, you have to put this before it in order for it to successfully work. Okay, so let's test this out. Hit refresh on the page, and I'll just type in something here: Goku, Gohan, and then Vegeta as the password. Okay, and then I hit submit, and it tells you form submitted, and then it passes you the object right here with the email, username, and password. Now, obviously, this is unsafe because it's not encrypted, but this is just for testing purposes. So let's go back into our controller. And so now that we have the data that we want to save in the database, we need to connect to the backend, right? So how do we do that? Well, if you recall, if you go into your backend folder, the app folder, and routes, and go into the API, this is our backend route of how we register users, right? So go ahead and copy this just as a reference. And remember, to access this route, it's actually going to be this route right here, right? So it's going to be localhost and whatever the port is on, API users, right? And the reason for that API, if you, in case you don't remember in the original videos, we had designated that right here, okay? So anyway, I'm just going to copy this just as a reference, and I'm just going to paste it down at the bottom, right? So what we want to do is use something in Angular called an HTTP request, right? And then, so the HTTP request is going to be of the post type because that's what our route is. And then it's going to look just like that. Now, in order for this to work, we have to pass this into the controller function, right? So we'll just type in HTTP. And inside of post, we'll just type in that same route, only this time we actually have to type API/users because it doesn't know to use the API like this one does, right? And then we'll just type in comma and we'll pass in the reg data, right? Actually, this .reg data. Okay. So go ahead and hit save and let's test this out and see if we can successfully register. Now I'd recommend going to your database and deleting any users that you have in there. Or you could just type in a brand new one, however you want to do it. But just hit refresh on the page and then type in something here. Okay, there it goes. It passed it again. Form submitted. Now go to your database and see if it worked. And there you go. It actually created our user there with an encrypted password and everything. Okay. Now we don't need this console log right here. So the next thing we want to do is we want to start providing front end alerts, right? We want to know, did this work, right? Not other than the console. Obviously, users aren't going to be looking at the console, right? So what we do is go ahead and remove the semicolon, and we'll type in something that says .den, pass in a function. Okay. So, and then we'll, inside the function, we'll type in data. And so basically what this does is, after this request is made, it's going to pass the data here, and then we can do whatever we want with it, right? So for right now, we're just going to log it to the console to see what it looks like. Okay, so let's hit refresh on that and try that again. Say Goku, and I'll just type in whatever. So form submitted, and here it is. It passed that data object here, right? So if you open it up, you can see more specifics on it, right? Now it's saying username or email already exists, right? Because we typed in that Goku. So if we just type in something else, we get another object here, and it says user created, right? So the next thing that we're going to do is actually go back into your application. Go to the API file, the backend routes, and we're going to change this up a bit so that because we can manipulate what we send back, okay? And so we're just going to change this. Instead of sending this ensure username, what we're going to do is send a JSON object, right? And I'll show you why in a minute here, right? So right below this one, right, type in res.json, and it's going to be an object. Inside that object, we're going to pass two things, success and message. So for success, we're going to say true, or I mean false, right? And then for message, we're going to take this one up here, pass that, right? Alright, so we're passing a JSON object, and its success is false because, remember, this first route is saying that the username was null or empty, or email or password, right? So we just want to do that again with the bottom here, right? Just cut that. JSON success false. Okay. Okay, so once you hit save, let's go back to the front end and see what this looks like now that we changed it, right? So now when you hit register, instead of getting all that data before, now what we're getting is two things, message and success, right? Because that's all we need. We just need to know if it worked, and we just need to know what the error message or success message is, right? So let's go ahead and pull the success and the message. So the way we do that is we just type in, go back to your controller. Instead of logging the whole data, we'll just log data.success. And then our other one was data.data.message. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. Hit refresh. And just register. And you'll see right there, success was false, and then here's our message. Okay, so now that we have obtained it in our controller, we can pass it as an error message to the user. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Go back into your register HTML page and create another div at the bottom. Okay, and so this div class is going to be row show hide message. Then we're going to create another div inside of that one. And this one is going to be alert success, right? Success message. And then just take that and copy it right below. Put some breaks in here because I know it's going to look rough. Okay. And this one we're going to change to error message. And so instead of alert success, we'll say danger. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. If you hit refresh on the page there, so this is what our success message is going to look like, and this is what our error message is going to look like. Okay, so we're going to take those messages that were logged to the console. So if you hit register here, we're going to take this message and we're going to insert it into these boxes. Okay. If you go back to the controller, I'll show you in a second how to do that. So the way you do that is you say if data.data.success is true, then we're going to do two things. One, we're going to create success message, and then we're going to redirect to home page. Else, if it's false, meaning it's returning false from our API, then we're just going to create an error message. We don't need to redirect because we don't want to, because there was an error, of course. Okay. So the way we create a success message, just create a new variable, and we'll name it success message. Then we'll assign it data.data.message. Okay. And so in order for this to work, we have to type in just like before. Okay. So now actually even this isn't going to work, and the reason for it is this is inside of a scope, right? Inside of the brackets. So this is not going to work outside of it. So the way we access it outside of it is we create a new variable here at the top right. And we can name it anything we want. We'll say app. And then we'll assign it this, right? So now this can be accessed outside of that scope, but we have to change the this to app. Okay, so go ahead and hit save, and then we're going to go ahead and implement our error message the same way. We'll call it error message data.data.message. Okay, now so back in our register, go ahead and copy this. And back in our register page, our HTML, go ahead and delete the success message and enter double brackets, right? This is how Angular passes data from the controller to the HTML page, is with double brackets. And then go ahead and paste that variable we created. But like before, we need this register dot before it. Okay. And so we'll do the same down here with error message, double brackets. Whoops. Oops, sorry, technical difficulties here. Register. I think we called the error message. Okay. So let's hit refresh on our page and see what that looks like. Right, so they're completely empty now, and as soon as I hit register, we get that error and it implements it right here, right? And then if we type in something valid, like let's say one something da da da. Okay, so you'll see that our success message is still being displayed in the red box. So I made a mistake in my API. If you go back, hopefully you didn't make the same error, but I forgot to pass true for the success option here, right? So then if you go back and refresh, register, you'll get the error here, and then enter valid data here. And then you'll get the success one here, right? So what we want to do is we want to make this red one go away once we have success, right? So the way we do that is we go into our controller, or actually let's go into our register, right? And so we'll say only show register.success message if there is one, right? So the way we do that, we type in ng show register.success message, right? Just the same, and we do the same down here. Okay, so if you hit refresh and hit register, you'll see you type something in. There you go, pops up, right? So we still have the issue where this one's not going away, right? And so the way we fix that is if you go back into the controller where the button is first pressed, this is right here, right? What you want to do is set that error message to true, false, right? So once it gets here, right, it becomes true because it's set. And so when the user presses it, it'll set it to false and remove it from the screen, right? So let's show you what that looks like really quick. So hit register, get it, and then type in valid data, see how it went away, and then we're getting another error, but then we can hit register, and there we go, user created, right? So go back into register, and we're going to do one last thing in this HTML page. So above all these error messages, you can just go ahead and put in another break, create another div, and within that div, type in a span. So this div class up here is going to be Jumbotron text center, and then the span will be I think it's glyph icon repeat spinner. And then below that, we'll type in a paragraph that says loading. Okay, and then so if you hit refresh, you'll see it on the page here. However, we don't want it to be there at all times. So what we'll do is we'll go back into the controller, and anytime the button is pressed, we'll create a variable called loading and set it to true. And then we'll set it to false once it's done resolving, right? So once it gets to this point, so we'll just say, right here we'll say app loading equals false. And we'll do the same in the error part. app loading false. Okay, so back in the registration page, we want to do the same thing, ng show, and we want to say register.loading. So whenever loading is true, show this. Okay, so you'll see when you hit refresh, it goes away. Let's type in, well, just hit register. And you'll see loading popped up really fast on the screen, but if you enter valid data here, you'll see it comes back up. Loading, and then user created, right? Awesome. So the only thing left to do now is to redirect the users to the home page. And so we do that in our controller right beneath our success message. Okay, and what we're going to use is something in Angular called location. Okay, and this is what it looks like. Where's it at? Okay, so we'll just copy this and we'll paste it here. And so inside the parentheses, you just put the path that you want to redirect users to. So we'll just say home, right, the default location. So let's see what that looks like. Hit refresh and enter valid data. Created. So one thing that I forgot, and it tells you here, you're referencing location, but you didn't define it. Basically, what you have to do is up here, comma, location. Okay, just like with the HTTP. So go ahead and refresh and give that one more try. And there you go, redirect. Now you're able to stop at this point. This works. This is totally valid. You can move on if you like, but I'd like to add a little bit of delay after the registration. So what I do is I use something in Angular called timeout. That's this right here. So go ahead and paste that somewhere in the bottom. And so what I do is right above this location path, I'll type in timeout. Okay, and then as you can see here, it asks for a function and a delay, and then these two are optional, right? So we'll just use the function and the delay. So let's go ahead and pass in the function, followed by the delay, and it's in milliseconds, so we'll say 2000 milliseconds. Okay, and so inside the function, we'll go ahead and pass in this right here. Okay, and then I'll show you in a second what that's going to look like. So don't forget, you have to pass in the timeout up here. Okay, so let's see what that looks like. Go ahead and hit refresh, and then go to your register route. User created, and then it redirects you, right? And so you could even go a step further in the success message. You can type in a concatenation and say ... redirecting. Okay, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second here. See, now it has the redirecting so that users know it's about to take you to the home page. Okay. Okay, so at this point you can go ahead and delete your console logs. We don't need these. These were just for testing purposes. Okay. So before we move on, we're going to do one last thing. If you go into your app folder, create a new one called services. Okay, and inside of services, create a file called, we'll say user services.js. Okay, and just like before, we'll just console log a testing user serve. Okay, and so go back into your index, and then we're going to go ahead and create the link to that new file, and we'll call it app slash services, and then user service.js. Services.js. Okay, so one thing I like to do is I like to kind of break these up a little bit. So what you can do that is you just go CSS cascade style sheets. You don't have to do this part. I just like to organize my code a little bit, so just bear with me for a second while I do this. Okay, there we go, and it just looks a little better to have it kind of sorted out like that. So go ahead and hit refresh on your page and see if the new files look correctly linked. There you go. Got it right there. So we'll go back into that file and go ahead and delete that. And just like before, it's going to be a module, and we'll name it user services with no dependencies. And we'll add that config, pass in a function to test it, just like before. Okay, and so we have to go ahead and pass this module into our main configuration file right here, app.js. Okay, there we go. And then hit refresh. There we go, testing user services. So we got that. So we can go ahead and delete this configuration. So we're going to create something called a Angular factory. Okay, similar to controller. So what you want to do first is name your factory. We'll call this one user, and we'll pass in a function. Okay, and so the first thing you want to do is name your factory. We'll call it user, say, factory, and we'll just create a new object, right? And then make sure at the end you return that object. Okay, so what I want to do is go back to our controller and copy this post request and paste it somewhere at the bottom so we know to reference it, right? So what we're going to do now is create a custom function that we can use throughout our application. And so the way we do that is we type in user factory, and then we name it whatever we want. We'll say create function. Okay, and then we'll say return http://post/API users followed by reg data. Okay, so we don't need this portion of it, this dot, because that's only within the control that you need that. Okay, and so what this is going to look like is it's going to look like this. It's going to be user.create, and then inside of the parentheses you have to pass in reg data. Okay, so we'll just take this and we'll copy it, and then inside the controller what we'll do is paste it right above it. And so go ahead and delete everything all the way up until the dot then. Alright, and so on this side you do need the this or the app. Okay. So let's go ahead and give this a try to see if it still works as originally intended. So go ahead and go to register and just attempt to register, see if it works. So it says user is not defined. One thing we forgot to do is in our controller file, you actually have to call this these two, the service and the factory. Okay, so inside the dependencies, you just type in user services, and after the timeout, you type in user. Okay, one last thing that I forgot, now that I'm thinking about it, is inside the factory, you have to, since we use HTTP, we have to pass that in up here, right? So HTTP. So now go ahead and give a refresh and see if it works. Now it says reg data is not defined, and that's in our user services file. So let's go back. Okay, so we actually have to take this and put it in the function. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to receive it from the controller. So go ahead and refresh. Hopefully you'll bear with me for a second here. There you go, user created redirecting, right? So we're basically back at where we started, but now we have this custom method here, or function, rather than having all the HTTP requests within here, okay? So the reason for that is this isn't mandatory that you do this, but it's a way to organize your code. So now we can actually access this throughout our application as many times as we want, rather than having to type this every time. So it's just a way to organize your code is all it is. Okay. So this is the end of this video tutorial. However, this next portion is going to be optional, and all I'm going to do is add in a little bit of CSS to animate the registration page. This is totally optional. If you don't give a shit about animation and AngularAnimate, you can go ahead and skip to the next video. You won't miss out on anything important. If not, let's go ahead. So if you notice when you hit register, this sort of just abruptly pops up, right? Well, I really hate that. So we're going to go ahead and add in something called AngularAnimate. So if you type in animate.css in Google, you'll get the GitHub page, and then you can just download the file. Okay, so go ahead and copy that file into your directory, into public assets, and then CSS. Okay. And then inside, go back to your index file, and then we're going to go ahead and link to that, right? So right below our Bootstrap, we'll say link assets css animate.css. Okay. All right, and then underneath the Angular, we're going to link to the Angular animate. So if you recall, we saved that in there. If you go to assets JS, you'll see it right here, Angular animate. So just be script assets JS Angular animate.js. Alright, so now that we have that rolling, we want to go back into our app config file and inject ngAnimate. Okay. Alright, so we're going to do one last thing, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a custom CSS file. Okay, so we'll just name it style.css. So this is what it looks like. Once you've created it, go ahead and pause the video and copy all of this into there. Okay, once you're done copying all this exactly as I have it, go back into your index, and then we're going to link to it underneath animate. So we'll say link assets css style.css. Go ahead and hit save. And so now you'll notice when you go to register, it's going to have a little bit of a better effect to it, right? So let's just see what this looks like. See how it's kind of smoother, and then when you get the loading one, right? So let's go ahead and see. See, when you load, it's actually got the spinning icon, and it's just a little bit more fluid, right? That's all we added to it, just spice things up a little bit. So that's the end of this tutorial. So in the next tutorial, what we're going to do is implement the login page.